February 9th, 2015, and the Williamson Jazz Band is conducting our first presentation with Captain Glenn Emery. Our guest speaker is Captain Glenn Emery. Have a nice round of applause for Captain Emery. His presentation is entitled 12 Seconds That Changed the World. It is an overview of man's quest and flight and focuses on the first powered flight of the Wright brothers, which lasted 12 seconds, and compares it with 12 seconds of flight in other iconic aircraft throughout the history of aviation. Glenn will also compare technology and music by citing the similarities of a complex technological machine like an airplane with a band or an orchestra. And you're going to wade through all the things that Glenn has done. He's a former Air Force pilot who flew 226 combat missions with MACV/SOG MACSOG in the Vietnam conflict, providing close air support for both U.S. and Vietnamese ground forces in Laos and Cambodia. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor, the Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry with Silver Star, and the Air Medal with 8 oak leaf clusters. Following his tour in Vietnam, he was transferred to the Strategic Air Command, serving as a B-52 aircraft commander during the height of the Cold War from 1972 to 1976. After his Air Force career, Glenn was a corporate pilot for a Philadelphia-based company for 10 years, flying a variety of corporate jets. In 1986, Glenn exchanged his wings for a career in sales and marketing with Hubbell Electrical Products, focusing on a do-it-yourself home improvement center channels of distribution. Glenn is now semi-retired and resides in southeastern Pennsylvania. To stay busy, Glenn operates Steppin' Out, a dog training and boarding service. He is also writing a television series about his experiences in Vietnam. The Central Highlands is a Vietnam version of the TV show MASH. It's the story of a group of capable yet reluctant pilots who confront the madness of the Vietnam conflict through their zany, disruptive, and somewhat mischievous antics. In addition, Glenn is studying jazz piano with renowned Philadelphia jazz maestro James Dell'Orefice. Thank you. I didn't write that, Glenn wrote that in. To stay in shape, Glenn rides 2,500 miles a year on the roads of Chester, Berks, and Lancaster counties on his bicycle, the B-52, affectionately called, right?
It's actually a Trek 5200, so, you know, B-52.
So, no further ado, nice round of applause. Please welcome Captain Glenn Emery.
Normally I have a more spectacular entrance. I come in, I actually eject out in the parking lot and then come in a parachute for effect, but we just had the icing conditions out last night, so I couldn't. So I'll take off these cheap sunglasses, and this is just part of the get-up. But I did spend some time in the military, as you can see. Back in 1969, when I was a senior at Temple University studying radio, television, and film, back in those days they had, we were involved in the Vietnam conflict, and they had this really neat thing called the draft lottery. And what it was is your birthday, everybody's birthday, was put into a big fishbowl, and they would pick out the numbers, and if your birthday matched the number, you would get drafted. So as a senior graduating from college, I got the notice from the draft board that indeed I was going to get drafted. And so I had to figure out what exactly I was going to do. I certainly wasn't going to leave the country. I didn't have anything wrong with me. I didn't really pursue graduate studies or didn't have some kind of occupation where I was needed. And I wasn't married, nor did I have children. So I decided to go talk to an Air Force recruiter. And he told me what he had to offer, and he talked about a pilot training program that they had. And you had to take the test, and if you passed the test, then you would qualify for the training program. Well, much to my surprise, I passed the test. I really didn't have any idea that I would ever have that type of ability, but I passed the test. And so I started my career in the Air Force. This is me in August of 1970, when I was a second lieutenant, and I had just finished my first supersonic solo. Soloing in anything in an airplane is a big deal because that's when the instructor gets out of the airplane and you can't hear him anymore. I'm sorry, you can hear him there. He's just not there. He's still yelling at you and telling you what to do. But you can see that I was pretty happy and had a big smile on my face. And it was amazing that you would tie a machine like that onto your butt and take off, and it was quite an airplane. Well, they don't just put you in an airplane to start. First, you have to learn how to be an officer and a gentleman. So they had this program called Officers Training School that you had to go to, and that lasted for 90 days. Just think, you come out of college as a college graduate, and they turn you into an officer and a gentleman in only 90 days. But, you know, it's the usual intimidation by a flight training officer and a lot of marching in detail, physical training, lots of parades, classroom, and then eventually you become an officer, and the next step is you go to undergraduate pilot training, they call it. Now, I was stationed down at Randolph Air Force Base, which was just outside of San Antonio. It was a beautiful, beautiful location, and that they used to call the Taj Mahal. That's the main building of the base, and it was just a great setting. But what happens in pilot training, I'm going to take this hat off now. What happens in pilot training is first, they put you in a small airplane that they call a T-41. It's like a Cessna 172, single-engine propeller. They want to figure out if you can fly that, then they'll put you in a jet. So they're not going to let you go past that yet. So this is a picture of me, my first solo. Same white scarf, except now it's a little yellow. This was my lucky scarf, and I actually, every time I flew in the military, I would carry a scarf with me. So I treat it with reverence. That's why I throw it on the ground like that. But the cockpit on the T-41 is very simple. There's just two wheels there, two steering wheels. There's attitude indicators and just a couple of buttons. But that's the first step. And you fly that for about 30 hours. And then they put you in this T-37 that they called the Tweet. It was actually a jet, but it was a small jet. And they called it the Tweet because it made a really, really loud sound. And but it could get up to about 425 knots, so it could zip you right along. And that's me after my first solo on the T-37. And you notice how they always look, you always have them looking up into the sky like that. You'll see another picture later on of Charles Lindbergh looking up into the sky like that. That's the cockpit of the T-37, side-by-side seating. Now we have something that's a little more complex. We have two engines. We have a stick instead of a steering wheel. And we also have just more gauges and buttons and circuit breakers to confuse you when you're up there in the air. Then we got into the T-38. This is the airplane that you saw me earlier in front of. This was, and they're still actually using this airplane after all these years. This is quite an airplane. It's supersonic. It could fly, it could, at a standing stop on a runway, we have what we call the rate of climb. This airplane could climb at 33,000 feet a minute. So what would happen is, you'd be at the end of the runway, fully stopped, light the afterburners, release the brakes, take off, and a minute and 15 seconds later, you'd be level at 30,000 feet. So it was quite a rush to have that behind you. It was fun for a young guy. We used to fly a lot of formation, 4-ship and 2-ship, and so after you finish pilot training, then you're awarded wings. Now we did do some silly, funny things, as guys do when they get off into the clouds and hide. So we would do tricks like that and just enjoy ourselves and not tell anybody that we did it. So after 7 years, this is sort of a summary of my career. That's my Air Force Blues. I can't fit into that anymore, but I'm proud to say that I can still kind of fit into this, pretty close anyway. But you know, we're here to talk about you and not about me. And when Jim told me a little bit about your school, I did some research, and I guess maybe what I should do is really go forward, because I understand, I read the statement by your president, President Rounds, about that your school now is going to become a college in July, I think it is. So I thought, I don't know whether that's going to actually be the logo. I'm not a graphic designer, but I just thought that really would be much better to talk about. And you know, what's really interesting about this institution is it's been going on for, 125 years. And, you know, in society, we need people that are people of the trades, of the different trades. We need them badly to fix things. And you know, society is more and more growing away from people to do that. And so it's important that you fellows get involved in this. And I think Isaiah Williamson really had a great idea when he had that statement about every available healthy man who has learned a good mechanical trade and is truthful, honest, frugal, temperate, and industrious is certain to succeed in life. So that's what this is all about. I see that my slide got a little messed up there, but when I came in, it's funny, I picked these out because I thought they were really interesting building blocks for any program and any young man to really follow. And I noticed that the flags on the driveway that I came by, you know, had all those one after another. But I thought, you know, there's one other thing that maybe should be added to that, and that is innovation. You know, you guys are going to be getting out there pretty soon into the working force, and you're young. Ideas go through your mind, and we need new ideas with everything that we have in our civilization. If nobody innovates, we don't get anywhere. So I encourage you, as you move along through your careers, to always think about innovation. And it's called the quantum thinking. Now, there's nothing spiritual or magical about quantum thinking, and it doesn't have anything to do with quantum theory of physics. What it has to do with is thinking out of the box. You look at a problem. Now, there's certain rules that you have to follow for every trade, let's face it, but attack these problems in a different way so that you might come up with a solution. So, here's one. Wait, here we go, I skipped the slide. You notice that a turtle makes no progress at all unless he sticks his neck out. So, same thing with us. If we don't really step forward and stick our neck out, we're not going to make any progress. Another saying that I like to use is, you can't steal second base unless you take your foot off first base. So you got to make that step and be innovative and be creative and be challenged. Now, here's another one. What do we see over here? What would you say that glass is? That's the standard. Is it half full? Is it half empty? Well, instead of looking at the problem that way, why don't you look at the glass from this way and see what's down that way? It'll give you a different way of attacking a problem, looking at something, maybe analyzing and coming up with a solution. Well, if you think that everything is a nail, the only tool you're ever going to need is a hammer, right? So, the idea is to analyze everything that you see and find different solutions to the problem. So think about innovation. So I mentioned about I have a painting story. So this is a true story, but people who sail, especially in blue water or ocean water, one of the biggest problems that they have is every once in a while they have to pull their boat up because the barnacles, they grow, they're live, and they grow on the bottom of the boat. And there's special paints that have lead in it and copper that isn't good for the environment. And eventually, it's a lot of work, and you can see what finally happens is you really have to just chisel those things off. And when you're doing it, I've done it to my boat a couple times, your hands get all chopped up and beat up, and it's just terrible. So there was a guy who lived on a dock and had a boat, and he was doing the bottom himself. And like most sailors that are on docks, there's a party at sunset every night. There's a big party. And somebody's always making food and bringing on treats. And so one evening, this one woman made a bowl of jalapeno bean dip. And she was quite proud of herself because she used these hot peppers that were from Texas. And it was the most painful hot peppers that anybody could imagine. And so she served up the jalapeno bean dip. And this guy, of course, he was impolite, so he didn't, he just took his hands in there and he dug it in there. And as soon as the jalapeno bean dip hit his cut fingers, wow, they hurt him. Gee, what's going on with that? So what he did was he thought about that. The light bulb went on, and he said, I'm going to try something. So he got a piece of wood, and he painted one side with this standard bottom paint that they sell in boating stores, and the other side, he mixed in a bunch of these hot jalapeno peppers, chopped them up, and put them in the paint, stuck it on the piece of board, let it sit there for a week or so, and noticed when he pulled it out that sure enough, on one side, these barnacles were beginning to grow with microscopic evidence of them. But on the other side, with the jalapeno bean dip, there was no growth of the barnacles. So the guy thought, hey, maybe I have an idea here. And he actually had it patented and wound up starting to produce it. And a big paint company, marine paint company called Interlux, bought the whole idea from him. Guy cashed in for, a couple $1 million, and now he doesn't have to do his bottom of his boat anymore. He gets somebody else to do it. But the fact is that you never know when an idea, an innovative idea, is going to come into your head. You could be standing in line, ready to dip into a bowl of jalapeno bean dip, and bingo, the idea is going to come. So always leave yourself open to those opportunities. Well, Jim said I was going to try to compare an airplane to a band. And, I want you to use a little bit of quantum thinking with me now on this, but it is a stretch, but I'm trying to think out of the box here. And if you look at an airplane, you have several systems that are important to the flight of that airplane. The mechanical system, the landing gear, the things that the doors, the environmental system, which is the pressurization so that we can survive inside this airplane at altitude. The hydraulic systems, which are used for landing gear and flaps and other devices. The fuel system, you got to have the fuel. You have the electrical, and you have the flight controls. So these are all the items that are very essential. And I forgot to put engines in there. You need to have those too. But everything has to work together to make that airplane fly. And of course, the pilot is the guy who sort of manages all those systems and puts it together. Well, at a jazz band, you have brass, you have the woodwinds, you have the piano, you have the percussion, you have the strings, and the leader of the band has to work together to make that machine work. So, really, if you look at anything from a system standpoint, you can really find some different innovative ways to look at solutions. Well, now we're going to get into the flying part a little bit. And once again, Jim asked me if I would tie music into this. So this is a bit of a stretch, but what I'm going to do is, as we go through the different periods of flight, I'm going to have a hit song of that year. And you probably won't, maybe you might know one or two of them, but you might have heard them. There's some oldies here, but there's one that's pretty funny. But let's just get into it and talk a little bit about it. Man has always looked at the birds from whenever he started to walk the planet, way before our time, and wondered, how do they do that? How do they fly? And he's always had a quest to really get up into the air. And a lot of men have thought about what they should do. Of course, in mythology, we got the story of Icarus, who had his wings that his father made him out of wax. And his father warned him, don't fly near the sun. But like every young man, he listened to his father, and he went up there, and the wings melted, and he fell to the earth, and that was the end of Icarus. But there are other ways that they started to think about flight, and this were hot air balloons. It's not powered flight per se, but it is flight. So people tried to experiment with different ways that they could make the balloon operate, but it could never really, it was always subject to the wind and the way the wind went. This is one that I think is really funny. This is a guy out in California that actually tied together a bunch of these balloons and put a seat on it and created havoc one afternoon in the skies above Los Angeles International by floating by in his balloon. So you don't want to try that at home.
How do you get banned?
Well, I don't know what the end result was, but it wasn't a good idea. What if you go through a flock of geese or something? You're done. You're cooked. You're a cooked goose, as they say. So then there were other ideas that guys tried. What are we going to do to make this thing fly? A lot of them wanted the flap wings, which is only one part of the flying, but they were also failures as well. Well, bird flight. Let's see. What can we look at? What can we think about a bird of flight? We see the wings flapping, but we see some other things that are happening here. So here is just a really neat sculpture, wooden sculpture of a bird of flight. And look at the great shape. I mean, the bird is a wonder of nature. It's perfectly shaped to fly. You ever notice sometimes when you look up and you see birds all standing on a wire, or maybe down the shore they'll be on pilings, and they're all standing the same way? The reason they do that is because they always land and they always face directly into the wind, because it balances them. So they're perfectly balanced and they don't get knocked over. So the bird has a couple things going for it. It has camber. The shape of the wing, the curved shape of the wing is very important. And birds, they can also change the shape of their wings as they fly for different speeds, slow and fast. The aerodynamic shape, it's smooth and it reduces air drag on the object. Now, early airplanes, as you'll see, didn't really observe the aerodynamics because they didn't have the technology to make airplanes with a smooth fuselage, but somebody had an innovative idea and decided they could figure it out. So that's all done to create lift. And what is lift? Well, if I'm two molecules of air and I'm coming across here and I hit this part of the wing, one molecule is going to go this way and the other molecule is going to go that way. It's going to take longer for this molecule to get to that part of the wing than it does for this one. So when you get to here, because this is faster, there's a lift. There's a reduction in air pressure here, and it just creates lift. So that's the natural part of a bird creating lift, and a wing does the same thing. So they started to figure out, okay, this is going to be something that's going to work. The Wright brothers weren't the first ones to figure out the exact solution to this, but they developed some other things that we'll talk about. So that's really how lift is created. So if you look at the side of every airplane, you're going to see this camber that creates the lift. Well, the Wright brothers, they grew up in Dayton, Ohio. Their father was actually a minister. He was a bishop for, I can't remember the faith, but he was a world traveler. And he used to bring the boys home a lot of toys. He used to go to France a lot. And the French were really interested in aviation at the time. And a lot of parts of an airplane, like an empennage, fuselage, these are all French names. And that's the influence that the French had on flying. But he would bring back interesting toys for them to play with, things that flew. And so these two guys, really tried to mess around with these and figure out what were some of the solutions to flight. So they thought about it over the years, and they opened up a bicycle shop in Dayton, Ohio. But a lot of time was spent tinkering and trying to work with their design. This was their basic design. And what they did was they figured out that by twisting or warping the wings, we could get different control over an airplane and make it go where it wants to go. Not just glide, but control it with ailerons and rudders. So we start our first music thing. But it was 1903, and the summer of 1903, they went down to Kitty Hawk. And here is a song from 1903. And you can all sing along if you want. A one and a two. In the good old summertime, in the good old summertime, strolling down a shady lane with that girl of mine. I'll hold her hand and she'll help mine, and that's a very good sign. And she'll be your tootsie wootsy in that good old summertime. No omitted sevenths or anything there, Jim, sorry, Yeah. All those church keys, But they moved down to Kitty Hawk, and the reason that they went down there was because the strong winds. Have any of you guys been down to the Outer Banks? Down in North Carolina? You need to make that trip sometime. It's about a 5-hour ride down there. And then, stay down there for a couple of days. But it's a really beautiful, beautiful site with this cape that goes down. But the winds come out of the northeast. And this is called Kill Devil Hills. And this is where they started to set up their operation. I'm not sure what I have. Yeah, I got the right button. So they went down there. They had been going down there for 3 or 4 years, but in 1903 they thought that they finally had the solution. They went down there and tested a lot with gliders, some on strings, some in free flight. But they basically worked hard at just trying to understand these controls. So this is the first airplane. This is the Wright Flyer. And I told you that what they did was they put some control surfaces on here that would help the airplane fly and control. Here is an elevator, which makes it go up and down. Back here is a rudder, which makes it yaw. And then the wings would work, much like a bird does, so that it would turn. And that was really the innovation that they applied to an airplane to really make it fly. Of course, it had a small engine in there. The engine, well, here it is, the first flight, December 17th, 1903. The engine was a single 12 horsepower engine. Now keep that in mind. So that's about the size of, a big lawnmower that you have, 12 horsepower, right? Max speed was 25 miles an hour. It weighed 745 pounds. And this was the exact moment that they first got this airplane in the air. And it lasted for 12 seconds. 12 seconds. When you go down there, if you do ever get down to the Outer Banks, go to the Kitty Hawk location. And they actually have the original setting of where this took place. So there's the Wright Flyer. It lasted a duration for 12 seconds. It averaged about 6 miles an hour because the wind was strong coming into it. And so it went for 120 feet in 12 seconds. So 120 feet is really about the size from home plate to second base, or the length of the goal line to the 40-yard line. So not too far, but nevertheless, they finally got an airplane up in the air and aimed it and put it where they wanted. So that was pretty significant. So the next thing that kind of grew curious people, of course, we had military aircraft in World War I, and there really wasn't a lot of development there as far as shapes of airplanes yet. They were working on that. But everybody wanted to be able to go intercontinental. They wanted to go over the ocean and get to Europe, because that was going to open up a lot of trade. So there was a guy by the name of Ray Ortega. He was a New York hotel owner. And in 1919, he put this prize up, a $25,000 prize for the first person that could take an airplane nonstop across the Atlantic Ocean. Now, there were a lot of people who attempted this, but they just didn't have the right design. They didn't have the right combination of machine, engine, weight, distribution, things like that. But this guy, Charles Lindbergh, who lived in St. Louis at the time, got a sponsor, the St. Louis Racket Club. Anytime you see a racket club there, it's high cotton. So these guys had some money, and they wanted to be a part of it. So they supplied all the money to build the Spirit of St. Louis. Now, if you look at the Spirit of St. Louis, you're going to see some things. You're going to notice the camber on the wing, right? Notice how the more streamlined lines, the pointy nose. So it was much more aerodynamic, and there was less friction that was going to be involved. They hadn't yet invented mechanisms for retractable landing gear. So that's why the landing gear is still fixed. And not only that, retractable landing gear requires a lot of weight. And this was a big problem to get enough fuel on board the airplane so that he could make the trip. So the trip, New York to Paris, 3,600 miles, 33 hours and 30 minutes. He actually wound up going through darkness twice to get there. And it was quite an ordeal. If you read his log, it talks about how 4 hours into the flight, he felt himself starting to fall asleep. As some of you might be right now, but that's okay. But what he did was, he went down lower so that he really had to constantly look out the windows and fly, so that he would be more occupied. But imagine trying to stay awake for that amount of time, and not only that, landing in the dark. So he departed on a stormy day out of Roosevelt Field, which is Long Island, a little outside of New York. The airplane was really nothing more than really a flying gas tank. It had, here's the engine. It had an oil tank here, and then here was a fuel tank, here was a fuel tank, and the wings had fuel tanks in them. So it was nothing more than something to carry fuel, because you needed to have that fuel to stay aloft for 33 hours. One interesting thing, I don't know if you can notice it with this picture, but it didn't have a window in the front. They needed to take that space and make it accommodate the fuel tanks. So what he had to do was he had to look out the side windows to see where he was going, and he also had a periscope there. But very simple indications and gauges there to work with. Well, here you go. May 21st, 1927, he landed at 10:22 p.m. in Le Bourget Aerodrome, Paris, France. The total time of the flight, 33 hours, 30 minutes. And he had not slept for 55 hours during this. So, you know, musicians, Jim will tell you, musicians are always around to take advantage of when money's going to be around, you know. So, a lot of people wrote songs about Lindbergh because they thought this would be, you know, Tin Pan Alley was a publishing area in New York City. So, this is the one that really caught off. Where do you see these words? Oh, well, I'll get here. Did I miss the words? Here we go. It's coming. We won't go through the whole thing, but you got to hear these guys sing. Here we go. And here's the chorus. Okay, that's enough of that. Unless you want to hear it.
Did he just go straight? Like, did he know where he was going?
Well, he had a compass, but you had to stay on the compass heading. They didn't have radio instruments like we have today. He could see, and he would fly by the compass. But interestingly enough, when he got to the coast of Ireland, he wasn't sure where he was. And he saw a fishing boat. A bunch of Irishmen down there fishing, and they must have thought they had too much Irish whiskey because they couldn't believe that this thing was coming out of the sky, you know. And he comes down, and he's flying around in circles, you know, and he's trying to tell them where he wants to go, and they're pointing that way. So he came over the coast, and then he sort of got his bearings, and then continued on to France. It's really quite a feat to do that. I want to go back here, though. Here's just a couple things. There were 9 teams that spent over $400,000. That's more than 15 times what the prize money was. And within 8 months of his flight, look at the things that happened. The number of U.S. airplanes quadrupled, the number of pilots tripled, and the number of individuals buying airline tickets increased 30-fold. So it really was an important moment in aviation history. So let's get back to the point of, we have the ticker tape parade, and we have Nat Schrilket and the Victor Orchestra. Yes, sir. There's the words. But in 12 seconds now, the Spirit of St. Louis went almost 2,000 feet. So we went from 120 feet to 2,000 feet. And that's the distance basically from the middle of campus out there to North Drive on 352. So that's just gives you an idea of how far we've expanded, how far we could fly in 12 seconds. The next thing that was really an iconic time in aviation and airplane was the DC-3. The DC-3 was really the first real airliner. It was pressurized. You notice it had retractable landing gear, so there's less friction. And it really, one of the things that's interesting about the DC-3 is that there were over 16,000 copies made of this airplane. That's how prolific it was. It was used a lot by the military, and in fact, they still use it today for some special type of cargo missions. But it was just an incredible workhorse. The Russian Military bought the license rights to it to build 5,000, and you can see some of the things that happen. There's the cockpit, little more gauges and things to help it fly, bigger wheel. It can fly about 1,500 miles with one refueling, and it could fly at 22,000 feet, which is really important because then you could get up above the weather. So I'm going to ask you to use your imagination on this one a little bit, because in 1937 in Chicago, the blues was starting to become a big piece of musical interest. And Chicago was the hub for a lot of blues, because a lot of the black population that was looking down south would move up to Chicago because it was the big city. And so in 1936, 37, there was a song that was written that was on a Billboard list, and it was called Sweet Home Chicago. Now, this will be interesting because I've never done this in public before, you know? I've done it at home. My dogs liked it. So that was an important moment in aviation history, and 12 seconds, 3,900 feet. So there we go from the center of the campus, straight run, Granite Run Mall, 12 seconds. Well, now we're starting to really explore. A man wants to go faster, he wants to go higher, and he's starting to think about, you know what, maybe I should go into outer space here. Maybe I should explore about that. So, what do you think that is?
Sound barrier.
Yeah, it's an airplane breaking the sound barrier. What this is, it's not an explosion or anything. It's just the air gets so compressed that the moisture squeezed out of it, and it makes a little cloud. But the speed of sound is 768 miles an hour, or 680 knots, and that's Mach 1. And what you see here is an airplane approaching the sound barrier, and you see how things are getting more and more compressed. Finally, they reach that critical point there where they're ready to break, and then they break through. And then you can see how the barrier just spreads out. So they designed the B-1 to do that. And I wanted to that's the B-1. I should have put that slide down a little lower. But what I wanted to do was show you the big critical problem that they had with trying to break Mach was what they call Mach buffer. Because as the air compresses, it gets choppy, it gets rough. These air control surfaces don't work on a conventional wing because they get all botched up, and then what happens is the whole airplane gets uncontrollable. You get into a situation called Mach tuck, and you can't recover from it, and you just go nose right down. Your nose dips, and boom, you go. So a lot of people lost their lives trying to break Mach. So this is the first airplane that broke Mach, and you notice some of the design characteristics of it. First of all, look how thin the wings are, because that way the air doesn't build up when it's going to break. The streamlined shape, just beautifully streamlined. The elevator is actually above the level of the wing because there is some turbulence that gets created, and what was happening was they were building the elevators down here, and that would just disrupt all the airflow around the elevator, and that would cause the Mach tuck. So that's really some of the, in a brief nutshell, that's the story of breaking Mach and Mach buffer. But if you look at this, you can see the rings. And what does it look like when you break Mach? Well, I've done it a couple of times. And imagine that you're imagine you're scuba diving, or you're not scuba diving, but you're snorkeling. And you have to get some goggles on. And you put your face right at the level of the water. And then all of a sudden, you see the wave come at you. And it just goes by you and it's gone. So what you see in an airplane is the wave. You actually see the wave coming up to the nose. And it just splits like that. And it goes back and then you just feel a little kick. And boom, you're through the barrier. You don't hear it because you're faster than the sound. But, and it's really, I mean, you go fast. It's not a big, great thrill personally to just go Mach unless you have to. It's not very fuel efficient, but you can get somewhere fast, that's for sure. So, that's Chuck Yeager. He's the guy who flew the X-1. It was called the Glamorous Glennis because that was his wife's name. Chuck never became an astronaut. You might, if you've ever studied any of the stuff about the right stuff and the astronauts, he never became an astronaut because he was pretty much a troublemaker. He was always getting into fights at the bars at night. And he was just a real rebel rouser. And they couldn't have anybody. They were looking for profiles like John Glenn and those guys who were great American heroes. Well, Chuck was a hero too because he had the guts to get in there. And the rumor was that the myth is that, or maybe it's not a myth, maybe it's true. But the night before his flight, he got into a fight at a bar, and he messed up his arm. And it was really tough to get inside that airplane. And in doing so, you had to close the canopy from the inside. And his arm was so messed up that he couldn't do it. So they actually gave him a broomstick. He was buddies with the crew chief, and they taped the broomstick on the handle so that he could close it and do the flight. So there's Captain Chuck Yeager. Copy of that hanging in the Air and Space Museum down in Michigan. It's the original one, I believe. Cockpit's a little more complex. To launch it, it was launched from the belly of a B-29. And it was dropped. And in 12 seconds, it went 2.7 miles. So now we're really starting to get somewhere, aren't we, in 12 seconds? 12 seconds, 2.7 miles, that's the distance from the center of the campus down to Aston. So hop in the next one, and 12 seconds later, you're going to be over Aston Wayne at the hockey rink there. The X-15, once we broke the sound barrier, we really wanted to go higher. We wanted to go faster. And we wanted to really get into outer space. And that was another whole contest that was going on around the world to try to get out of the atmosphere and fly an airplane up in space. To do so, you had to get higher than 300,000 feet. I don't know how the physicists and the scientists determined that was outer space, but that's where you had to get to qualify. So the North American X-15 in July 1962, 3,831 miles an hour, 4.9 Mach. It got up to 59.6 miles, or 314,000 feet. One of the guys who was really, this is a name you probably would recognize, the first guy who landed on the moon, Neil Armstrong. But he was one of the most talented and gifted test pilots that we've ever had in this country. He flew everything that we had to fly, and he was one of the pioneers with the X-15. It was launched from the belly of a B-52, and again, there's the cockpit. Not as many instruments because it's a rocket. It's basically a rocket. It's an airplane with a rocket on the back, and you light it, and boom, you take off. The landing gear actually are skids, and they come in at about 220 miles an hour, land on the desert on sand when they would use this airplane. So quite an interesting airplane, and responsible for really all of our exploration into space. The X-15 in 12 seconds, 12.7 miles. We're getting close to Maryland now. Is the Maryland guy there? Yeah, right. And that is the distance from Williamson Tech to Wilmington, Delaware. So hop in that X-15, 12 seconds later, bing, there you are. So now we're really starting to honk, aren't we? This airplane never really broke the records because there were others that were faster, but it's just a fascinating airplane. It's called the SR-71, one of my favorite airplanes. It's a reconnaissance airplane, takes pictures, was used a lot during the Cold War, and I just really love the lines of it. But the technology that went into the development of this airplane was incredible. Special paint was needed because of at the high speeds that it traveled, there was a lot of friction. The paint that actually would have been the best is if it would have been gold paint, gilded, you know. But they realized that would be such a public relations problem that they developed this paint that was iron pellets that would mold into the fuselage, and it could handle any of the temperature changes that would take place at the altitude. This defense tactic on this airplane was, if it sees a missile that's fired, they just light the afterburners and it would outrun the missiles. Nobody could catch it. The engines would expand and contract as it went up and down from altitude because of the difference in the thickness of the air. So pretty neat airplane. I had a squadron commander who flew these. He was a really good guy, and he told some good stories about this airplane. But there you go. Now we're starting to get into some big numbers of thrust, horsepower. So this developed 68,000 pounds of thrust, which is equivalent to 136,000 horsepower, which is about 11,500 lawnmowers figure. So, but a beautiful airplane, and one of my favorites. This airplane would go 8.4 miles in 12 seconds. But as I said, it never really set records as far as braking speed and things like that. Now we get into something that's a little more interesting, the space shuttle. And this is the final episode. But now, in that period of time, we're now putting together all this technology, all these things that we've learned through the years, supersonic flight, Mach tuck, outer space, and now we're going to have man not just shoot them up in a capsule and bring them back down again, or even not that going to the moon wasn't a great feat, but now we're actually flying something up there, and we're bringing it back down again and controlling it. And it would allow them to stay up for a long time. Let's look at some of the numbers here. A lot of different interesting things. That was all about this machine. There were a couple that actually, as you know, there were two that were lost. One was because of the covering underneath. The heat shields got broken off by a piece of ice when it was coming down to land through the atmosphere. The heat was so great that it just destroyed the entire machine. It just blew up. Another was caused by a bad seal on these boosters. And that was the first one that went down. But look at this. We're talking about 17,000 miles an hour, Mach 23, about 260 miles up to get into orbit, 7.6 million pounds of thrust, 15.2 million horsepower, or 1.3 million lawnmowers. There it is at the launch. There it is speeding up there at 17,000 miles an hour. Coming in, re-entry, lots of heat. This is where the problem occurred with, I think it was the Discovery. That's where the wing was damaged with the ice, and that's just broke apart, and then the airplane just basically blew up. Landing at 212 mile an hour. You don't have any engines, you glide in, but pretty interesting. Now we're talking. Now we could probably get the Maryland here in 12 seconds, because from the campus here at Williamson, in 12 seconds, get to Ocean City, New Jersey. So now there's another. This really kind of took us into outer space, and it took us to different realms. And this is a song by Elton John that I like that has to do a little bit with space travel. Just packed my bags last night in flight. 0 hours, 9 a.m. I'm gonna be high as a kite by then. I miss the earth so much. I miss my wife. This lonely out in space. the comparisons of all the different flights. This is just a graphic, sort of speed distance scale here. The Wright Flyer went a dot, and you can see how things get longer and longer, near now to 60 miles in 12 seconds. So, a couple of things here as we sum it up. One of the things that, flying, while you want to be innovative, there are always checklists that you have to go through. And when you start up a machine or you do something in your trade, you're going to have to go through the same thing. So there's not a lot of room for creativity when an emergency happens. So one of the things that we had to do is we had to memorize all these things that were really critical. And the three basic steps for an aircraft emergency is, number one, maintain aircraft control. I mean, that's a good idea. Let's fly the airplane. And that's a good idea for any problem that you may come upon in life. Just keep your head, maintain control of what's going on, and then you want to analyze the situation, take proper action. There's going to be manuals that you'll have. There'll be things that you will think about. You'll know. You analyze it. Don't move too fast. Take your time. Take proper action. And finally, land as soon as possible. Everybody says possible, but you know what? The real answer is conditions permit, because it may be possible to land, but suppose if you're up in Maine and you have a moose on the runway, or anything. It's not always as soon as possible, because you want to make sure that the conditions are right for you to bring that airplane back to the ground, or to solve your problem without other issues. So, that's about it. Any questions? Anything that comes across your mind? Yeah?
In 12 seconds, how far would all like the airplanes today get?
An airliner in 12 seconds would go, I'm just trying to give you a good number. What I said, the DC-3 went 2,000. It would go, well, almost a mile. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Oh, about 3 miles. Yeah, about 3 miles, yeah. 3 miles. Because at cruising speeds in an airliner, you're traveling almost a mile a minute.
Yeah.
Pretty close to that. So you go about 3, or, around there. Yeah, 12, 5, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
What's the fastest, I guess, airliner or jet ever going like a minute or so?
Is this a conventional airplane or?
Like a jet or?
Well, the Concorde, which was an airliner, was supersonic. I think that cruised at Mach 2.3. The SR-71 would enter these speed contests from London to New York, and that was pretty quick. That could average 2.3 Mach. That could cruise along at about 3,000 miles an hour. Now the X-15 was faster than that, but it couldn't sustain flight. So, when you get up to those speeds like that, you're really consuming a lot of flight. That's why fighters, for example, the F-22, really hot airplane, but you can't keep an afterburner all the time, because you're going to burn out fuel. Now you can refuel if you need to. Yes?
What's the fastest plane you ever had?
The fastest plane I was in was that T-38. Here, that one. Yeah.
That breaks Mach, right?
Yeah, that could 1.3 Mach. Yeah.
What's that like, breaking Mach?
Well, it's not so much the breaking of the Mach, other than the realization that you've done it, and you just see the little odometer. I mean, the speedometer, just kind of Mach indicator bubbles a little bit, and you're through. But it's the idea of breaking Mach that gets you excited. But getting there, you light the afterburners, and you just scream up, and you're going up so fast that you can't just level off like that. You have to do an aileron roll, otherwise you get too many negative G's. And it's fascinating. The first time that you do that, you get in that airplane, and each airplane that you would fly, they would give you what is called a dollar ride. The dollar ride goes back in the days when aviation, there was barnstorming going on, and guys would take their airplanes to different fields, and everybody would pay $1 and he'd take them up for a little ride. Well, they did that, and you weren't graded on the first ride. And I went with this colonel. This colonel took me up, and he wanted me to adjust the mirrors. There's mirrors on the front there that you could see the tail of the airplane. And I couldn't figure out why that was so important. He hit the throttle, we started to go, and he's describing, well, here's he's spitting all these things out, and you're going, well, what's he talking about? What's he talking about? You're supposed to be thinking those things. You get the airplane off the ground, you level off just about 50 feet off the ground, suck up the gear, suck up the flaps, pull it like that, and then it goes up. And what you see in the mirrors is the ground just getting smaller and smaller, and you go, yo, they're gonna let me do this someday? Yeah. So that was the fastest airplane that I ever flown.
Where have you flown to?
Where?
Flown to?
I've flown all in the continental United States, up into Canada, been to Greenland, been over in Vietnam, flew over there a lot. A little bit down into South America. I've not really actually personally flown in Europe, but been flown a lot of places.
You still fly today?
No, I don't, for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's a very expensive hobby. It was different then. They were paying me to do this. It's a very expensive hobby. And, what am I going to fly? I mean, really, that I could afford, a small propeller engine. I wouldn't get excitement out of it unless maybe if my daughter was interested in flying, then it would be fun to just take her up and, spend some time, or a grandchild, then I'd be enthused about it. But I don't fly anymore. Yeah. Another question.
How long did you serve?
7 years, 1969 to 1976. I don't regret a minute of it.
So you missed-
I wish that we didn't have war, and I wish that I didn't have to go to war. I did. I wish that young men like you don't have to do that. I'd like to see us, be in peace. But I don't regret the time that I served. It was a very interesting time, and I learned a lot.
Miss Woodstock.
You know what? I landed down. You're right. It was like 3 days after I reported down at Lackland Air Force Base for officer training school. Woodstock.
3 days
Yeah, that was a bummer. That was totally a bummer. I could have at least waited. Hey, don't take me yet. I want to go to Woodstock. Then I'll be there. You're right, though. Good observation.
Never would have made it.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, they would have given me some urine tests on the way back, I'm sure. Any other questions? Well, gentlemen, it was a pleasure. And you know what I said about your thinking and being innovative as you go out there into the field with your trades? Keep that in mind, because we really need sharp young minds like you guys out there making things happen. So, thanks. Okay.
Great presentation.
Nice round of applause.